Hey guys, welcome back to the Shared Voices podcast. I am the founder and the director, Daniel Deffenbaugh, and I'm excited to have Doug Haynes back on the podcast. He was on the last episode. If you have not heard it, I would recommend going back and listening to that one. We talked more about Doug's film that he created, Residual, that helps first responders and their families talk about stress, talk about PTSD, talk about the mental struggles that can happen being a first responder. And we talked a little bit about, Doug, your journey into this 2-year project. Actually, it's probably more than 2 years if you think about when you first started. But first of all, thank you again for being on. And I want to jump right back in because last episode we talked about traditional therapies, and we only covered a few of each one of these. Biological treatments, natural activities you can do, holistic modalities. And we got through about 3 of them, and we were given some examples. And really, what I want people to hear, Doug, about this list and to hear from you is when you did this 2-year journey of traveling around the United States, doing 80 some interviews and researching with doctors and first responders, is that you have learned, just like how I've kind of learned, is that to get relief from stress and to get help with PTSD, and to take care of your mental health, you have to be intentional. You have to be proactive. And you also have to be able to look at therapy and realize that one shoe doesn't fit everyone.
Right.
What may work for me, Doug, may not work for the next person. And what we've talked about right before we started recording was not one of these by himself could be the answer for your help. But if you combine these are meant to be combined. These are not just, don't pick one and just do that one. Guys, we got to combine this. We got to add our physical activities into our stress relief of hunting. And I know our spouses may not like me to say that, but getting out and getting out hunting and fishing and doing that kind of stuff is important. But it's also important to do your traditional therapies. You do, if you're comfortable with group therapy, peer support, EMDR, cognitive behavioral therapy, that kind of stuff. You have to kind of add these tools, these mental tools you have on your tool belt, as we do as police officers. You got to have a lot of these tools on there that you can grab and use multiple of them throughout their life to help with the healing process and the prevention process of mental struggles. So again, thank you for being here, and let's jump right back in, Doug. So tell me about that. What's something when you're traveling around you kept hearing it sounds like from what you're saying, some treatments work for some people and some don't work at all for others. Some people say that one treatment saved their life and other people can say it did nothing for me. And that's okay. That's
Right.
the whole point we're trying to bring up. So tell me about that. As you went around this and as you did your 2-year journey, what was it about compounding the multiple different types of therapies and activities that is working for people? What have you learned about that?
Right. The general theme that I got from a lot of people, and there was a number of sound bites I put in the documentary, is find what works for you. That's kind of the overall theme of treatments and therapies. Find what works for you because it's different for every single person, and most of the time it's not just one thing. It's a combination of different things. Doc Springer out in California was the first one that brought to my attention because she wrote a paper on this, that a lot of times when somebody comes in with severe PTSD issues, they have a lot of anxiety, they have a lot of depression, they have a lot, that recurring nightmare that goes on in their head. They're not sleeping well, so they're irritable. They're not thinking straight, and it's really hard for a traditional therapist to kind of break through and make a difference because they got so much going on in their head.
Yes.
And that if they go through one of those biological treatments, such as stellate ganglion block, that's one that she endorses, that Doc Springer endorses, where they inject anesthetic into the nerves in the neck, and it helps break that connection between the amygdala and what's going on down in the body, and basically it kind of resets the whole brain so that the brain then can kind of come back down into a normal stage, and then the traditional talk therapy then can be effective.
Makes
Um,
sense.
same thing with the low dose ketamine. That treatment I found very interesting. That by by bringing down all the levels of the anxiety and depression and all the other symptoms, that then traditional talk therapy works a lot more, a lot better. Then you can really get through and deal with somebody to, when issues come up, and then help them process them,
Yep.
and that's what gets them better. So it's always a combination of all these different things.
Yes, and
That find what works for you, find what works best.
yeah, and as you guys know, all the time on this podcast, we say, we're not professionals. Doug and I are not professionals in the mental field. Um, we are just saying what number one, we've experienced and what we've heard from people and what we've witnessed. And so we're not saying these are the fix, these are the end all. We're just reporting on some stuff that we've seen in our journey that have worked for people.
Right.
And we just want to bring it to people.
Right. For example, the under biological treatments, we have fascial counterstrain. Now, fascial counterstrain is kind of a more of a massage techniques that releases inflammation throughout the body. And during traumatic experiences, inflammation tends to build up in certain areas, and it can restrict blood flow to certain parts of the body, not only in the brain, but in the chest, in the back, throughout really the whole body. And fascial counterstrain through massage techniques releases the inflammation, and it can have an immediate effect because suddenly blood flow opens back up to an area, and the patient can feel it immediately and feel results immediately. The guy that was demonstrating it, he wanted to perform it on myself. So I laid down on the table, and he worked on me for like 15 minutes and didn't do a thing for me. Just didn't do a thing for me.
Yeah.
But I've interviewed other people that have gone through the process, and they use phrases like life changing,
Yeah.
life saving.
Yeah.
Fascial counterstrain saved my life, the one guy says in the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, well, didn't do a thing for me, but saved this guy's life. So, there again, it's different for every person.
Yep.
You
And
know?
I think that's why we need to not judge people too, how
Right.
they get their help.
Yeah. Now, the fourth area, the holistic modalities, that is probably one of the fastest growing areas of treatments that are coming into play. You get into the mindfulness part of it. That's where it gets into kind of some of the holistic stuff. Faith and spirituality. Music and singing bowls. People like to laugh at the singing bowls, but it's gong and these old Tibetan singing bowls and wave them around your head, and yet it really helps a lot of people.
Yeah.
It helps regulate the body, and it's all about vibrations, and you get into the chakras and some of this different stuff, but for a lot of people it really works. Hypnosis is in there. I wasn't able to include that in the documentary, but I got some good testimonials talking about how hypnosis can really, really help with PTSD. That back in World War II, that's what they used primarily to treat, soldiers with shell shock or whatever. They used hypnosis, and it worked really well.
Yeah.
And we've kind of gotten away from that. But and then there's this one called trauma release exercises. Had one gal talk about that.
What's that one?
You can go online, and if you just on YouTube and just put in trauma release exercises, and there's a whole series of videos by this organization that it's kind of, you do kind of yoga poses, but you hold it in certain ways, and suddenly your muscles start vibrating, and it's releasing trauma. And there again, it's one of those things that it's like, man, that looks kind of weird. I don't know if I'd
Right.
try that, but a lot of people swear by it. That really works.
Works for some and not
Yeah.
others, and that's the whole point
Yeah.
behind all of this. It doesn't work for everyone, but and also combining them is the best way to get the best healing in my thought anyway.
Right. Yeah. So there's so many different treatments and therapies. Right now I've got 30 on the list. There's 22 of them that we talk about in the documentary.
Yeah,
there's so many more that could be coming up.
Yes, and I want to go into that. Thank you for bringing that up. Number one, I want to point people to Doug's website. Doug, you want to give him the website, because the reason why I want to direct you to the website, number one, it's the website for the film, but as Doug said, in all of his 80 interviews, he had to cut this film down from like 80 to 90 hours to like 93 minutes. But he's filmed so much more that he wants to show. So if you go to his website,
residualfilm.com.
Residualfilm.com. If you go to that, Doug, what will they find on there? Because I know you have the film, but you've also have utilized. You don't want to waste any of the stuff you filmed because so much of it was good. So the stuff you're wanting to do, and you also had to shorten down segments, and maybe you couldn't explain them as much as you would like to in the video,
right,
in the full length film. So what will they find on there, and what's the purpose behind it?
Well, the residualfilm.com, I'm hoping, can be a continuing resource for any first responder who, you can go to it and watch the whole 93-minute documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Also got a couple of the trailers on there. People still like watching the trailers. But I've got a lot of the featured segments of the treatments and therapies on there. Now, in the documentary, I had to cut them down quite a bit to make the 93-minute length. So they're all like 1 minute to 2 minute length in the documentary, but I have full-length versions of each treatment and therapy that's on the website. So you can go there and, for example, the therapy dogs segment. In the documentary, it's only 1 minute and 55 seconds. The full-length version is 4 minutes and 6 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go and if there's any of these, treatments, of the biological treatments that you want to learn more about. There's extended interviews, there's additional interviews, there's more detail explaining what the procedure does. I wanted to provide that information. Even though it's not in the documentary, it's still important information. So you can go to the website, residualfilm.com, and watch these extended versions of the treatments and therapies. What I'm also going to do is, and it's not on there yet, but is create a series of 2 to 3 minute shorter clips of like outtakes of material that wasn't used in the documentary, but is still good, helpful
Still has
information.
value. Yeah,
it still has a lot of value to it. I'm gonna do a clip here pretty soon, which talks about some of these other holistic modalities. Where we get into hypnosis and some of these other things that's not in the documentary, but could still be helpful information.
Yep.
And there's some great stories of, like in the equine therapy. There's this great story this gal told. It's like about a 3 to 4 minute story about this veteran who was very reluctant to do any kind of, had been suffering from PTSD symptoms for a long time, but was very reluctant to talk to anybody, didn't want to talk to any therapist. So she brought him out and introduced him to this horse, and they were just out in the pen there by themselves, and pretty soon she looks out and this guy's talking to the horse. A few minutes later, she looks out, this guy's crying.
Mm-hmm.
He starts opening up to this horse, and as he walked back, all she said to him was, "See you next week." He says, "Yep."
That's
and
awesome.
Over the course of a couple of weeks, then he started opening up, and he was able to then talk to her, and then the traditional talk therapy worked on him.
Yes.
But up to that point, he didn't want to talk to anybody. He was set in his ways.
But that broke it. That broke the ice.
Yeah, but it's like a 4 minute long story,
Yeah.
the way she tells it, and it's great. I couldn't use it in the documentary; it's way too long. But it'll be on the website eventually as one of the featured segments. I'm thinking of calling it Resilience and Hope series.
Yeah, I love it.
So it'll be 30 or 40 shorter video clips of different stories of people overcoming their PTSD and different ways to treat them. And
that's going to be neat.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad you're
So
using all of it.
hopefully the website will be kind of an ongoing, you know, um, ever changing, new content coming on, and who knows, maybe in the future I'll even do some more interviews and
I was going to ask you that.
put some new information on there.
I was going to ask you that. Could there be more in the future? And it sounds like there may be.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's a subject that is ever changing.
Yes.
There's new things coming along all the time. Um, you know, for when we were talking to those new recruits, last night at the Iowa
Academy.
Academy, yeah. You're looking at it, all these young faces, and you're thinking, these guys, they really don't have an idea of what's coming up.
No.
They really, they're all, full of excitement and confidence, and they're invincible, and
Yep.
and it's like, no, really, 30% of you guys in this room, you're going to struggle with PTSD,
Yes.
and it's going to be bad, and just
And it doesn't have to be.
please know that there are so many resources available. There's so many treatments and therapies available. If you're just aware of it going into it, you can spot it early. It doesn't have to end your career. It doesn't have to end your life.
That's right.
Things you can deal with. You can deal with this. You can overcome it.
And you don't have to do it alone. There's
Exactly.
people that want to walk alongside you. That's what our organization is. We're there to walk alongside people through that journey, because it can get ugly, it can get messy, it can get confusing. And to do it on your own is pretty hard.
Right.
And it takes people like you, Doug, making films like this, people like in my organization and other people that were at the showing last night to stand up and start talking about this stuff. And I love that it's finally happening. I started my career, 23 years ago, and it wasn't talked about a lot then. And thank God that it has now come to the forefront in most departments, and I would just say the world. Finally, the first responders are finally, people are noticing the stress they go through, the destruction that can happen, the suicide, and they're willing to stand up and battle it. And you are one of those soldiers that are willing to stand up and battle it. And I love that about you. And I just want to share one thing. When I got to talk to you during a lot, become friends with you during this film, and we got to talk a lot over the last couple of years. And one of the cool things is when you went to release this film, a month or two back now. How long's it been?
It's been a month, yeah.
I honestly, a lot of us thought, and I think I thought, that you were going to release the film in a way to maybe try to make some money off of it, because you dedicated 2 years of your life. And you sent me an email with the link, and you said you're releasing it. And I grabbed my phone and I looked at it, and I thought, I wonder what happened. So I called you, I think, right? Did I call you? Yeah. And you said the most beautiful words that I could hear. You said, man, after spending 2 years of doing that film and talking to first responders, I got to get this film out there now. I need to release it today, because if it can help one first responder today, and if I wait to release it later, that's not what this is about. This project was about purpose for you. It was about bringing healing to people. It wasn't about money. And when you went ahead and just released it without trying to get, funds for it or anything like that, you did it for the right reasons. You released it. And I think that's magical. In this world where so many people are focused on profit, you're focused on purpose. And that's what this whole journey of yours is. And I thank you for that. I love your heart. I love that you're doing this for the right reason. And I pray throughout this journey of you producing this film that you'll get some donations that come in, because I do know you have a donation page, and I would encourage people to go to that and help be a part of the fix, help be a part of the cure, help fund Doug and what he's doing as he's producing this film and editing and getting other stuff ready to go. Go to that website. Is there a giving thing on your website?
Yes.
Okay.
There's 2 different donation segments on residualfilm.com.
I love that. And I would just say, guys, if you feel it on your heart to go there, and whether it's $25 or $5,000, whatever it is, to kind of help Doug out. He did this out of his own heart. If you guys feel called to give a donation, or if you know any corporate sponsors, or maybe your work, they give money back to organizations like his and what he's doing, I just ask you guys to pray about it and give if you feel led to give to it, because what you're doing, Doug's amazing, and I love the connections you've made and the kind of the expert. I know you're not an expert as far as a doctor, but you are becoming an expert and kind of learning about uh, this whole mental journey of mental struggles in law enforcement. And so many people in the past said that first responders were faking it. They were trying to get attention. It wasn't real. They need to suck it up. Belittled it and made people afraid to reach out for help. And you are helping change that. You are helping to bring this to people and change the culture. And until we change the culture, Doug, we're not really going to be able to fix the issue.
Right.
Because if we don't have a culture where people can stand up and say, I hurt, I'm struggling, I don't know why I don't feel like living, I don't know why I don't feel like getting out of my bed. If they can't raise their hand and say, I need help, and to do it in a safe, secure way, and to have that culture to know that there's a community of people that love you and want to support you and walk along this journey. Until then, until people can understand that, Doug, it's going to be really hard for people to get the healing that they need, because they're going to feel isolated. They're going to feel alone, just like I did in my journey, and they're going to feel lost and broken. And that's not the case. What I would say to you, if you're struggling like this, if you're having issues, I would say congratulations, you're normal. It's part of what we do as first responders. It's just part of the job. But there's ways we can help you with that. And as we start to wrap this up, Doug, what's a few key points that you would tell the first responders, and not just the first responders, but the first responders and their families? Because you're not a first responder. So you came into this as an outside person, walked into the first responder world and saw that. What would you tell the first responders' families and the first responders that maybe feel like there is no hope, or maybe they're worried that their first responder in the future is going to have problems? What's a few things you would say to them to give them hope about what you've learned in your journey?
Well, another one of the reoccurring themes is smash the stigma, change the culture. Everybody wants to do that. I think there's been a lot of progress made just recently in departments and in the management staff. I mean, it was very common, and I heard this from so many, especially police officers, that if they would go to their boss and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this call or whatever," their immediate response was, "Okay, put your badge and gun down on the table, and we'll get back to you."
Yeah.
And so, because of that, so many people did not come forward.
Yep.
And they dealt with it, and it got worse, and then they got to the suicidal stage, and I think departments are starting to realize that they need to treat PTSD just like they would any other injury. If they think of it as PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury.
Yep.
And it's an injury that can be healed and you can come back from. If a firefighter steps off a ladder wrong, breaks his ankle, they don't fire him.
Right.
No, he goes and gets medical treatment. He's out for 6 to 8 weeks. He might need some physical rehabilitation, but then he's back on the job.
Yep.
Why can't PTSI be treated the same way?
Right.
It's the same thing. There's an injury in the brain from all these chemicals being released. You can go get treatment for it. You can do some, physical rehabilitation, if you will.
Yep.
And then you can come back to the job.
Yep. And that's okay.
Especially with retention problems in departments all across the country. Don't discard these guys just because they're struggling with some PTSD.
Yes.
Work with them. They can become good officers again.
Yep, absolutely. Instead of just being thrown away and discarded like a piece of trash.
Right.
We're not machines. We are people. We have our ups and downs. We get exposed to trauma, and we just got to be allowed to be humans. I feel like in first responders, it's getting better, but in the past, we were able to give grace and compassion to the whole community as first responders, but we couldn't give that to each other. And we couldn't. For whatever reason, it was a stigma around it, and you're helping break that. So what would you say? Because I know you got to talk about spouses. I want to touch on that just real quick. What would you say to the spouses about what you learned in your journey? Meaning, if they're feeling hopeless, if they're like, man, my husband or my wife, who's a spouse, they're just not themselves anymore. They're no longer doing the things they enjoy. What would you say that the spouses could do? Because these types of treatments are not just for the first responder. There's secondary trauma that happens in our spouses and things like that. But Um, I, because for me, I'd say the spouses is when you marry into law enforcement or a firefighter, any first responder, that is not just your spouse going into that career. You're going into that career as well,
Right.
because you are going to go through the stuff that your spouse goes through. So what would you say that about this? What would you encourage them to say that this is not just for the first responder?
Right. The one of my favorite sections. It's toward the end. It's after it's after the breaking point. The breaking point is where everybody's talking about different suicide attempts and how they feel, and that's kind of the low point of the documentary. We kind of take them through the chronological order, if you will. Here's the job. Here's some of the traumas you're going to see. The cumulative effects of trauma. The symptoms that you're going to have. Some of the other problems that you're dealing with. Then you get to the breaking point, and from that point on, then we wanted to make it more positive and uplifting toward to the end of the film.
Yes.
And it starts with the segment 7, which is PTSD in your family. And there's some really good comments from spouses in there about how they dealt with it and what they found works and what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good section for spouses to watch. If they don't watch anything else in the whole documentary, watch that segment on PTSD in the family.
I love that.
Because it's involving your family. Don't just isolate. Don't go off don't go off in your basement and drink.
Yep.
After every shift.
Like I did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But really, tell the spouse what you can. Aaron and Trisha Groves had a long. There was a lot of content in there that they talked about how when Aaron would come home, he would put up these walls.
Yep.
Because he was shielding his family from the trauma that he experienced. He didn't want his family to go through that.
He thought he was protecting him.
He thought he was
So
protecting
did I. Yep.
him. But Trisha, his wife, saw that as he's shutting me out.
Yep.
He doesn't love me anymore. I'm doing something wrong.
Yep. Yeah, she took it as an identity on her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But once they finally got together and realized what was going on, then they were able to work through that. And I think that probably happens in a lot of first responder marriages. And that's why there's so many divorces. Because somebody's going through some really traumatic stuff and they don't want to bring it home. And it just creates all kinds of problems.
Yeah, and the spouses have to be intentional as well. It's and honestly, Doug, I know for a lot of us, it's probably going to be our spouses that first get us to start talking about it and or that start encouraging us to get help. But a lot of times it's going to be the spouse who's not the one that's in the trenches struggling, fighting with all this stuff going on. They're the ones that usually see it first. And they're the ones that usually can help the first responder right from the get-go. Encourage them with the right words, can encourage them to get help. It's so important.
Yeah, your wife Christina, she said in there, it's the wife has a unique responsibility to kind of help the first responder through this, and she talked about giving grace and space.
Yes,
is very important, and that was a good line in there.
Yes.
Another section that I always like is toward the end. It's called Living with PTSD, and it's like after you've been through all this, and that's where we get into residual symptoms and things like that. But there's ways you can cope, and there's ways you can heal, and there's ways you can grow through all this.
Yes.
It doesn't have to always be negative. You can turn it around and make it a positive thing. And that's what we tried to emphasize in the closing. It's called Turning the Corner. Segment 10. Really tried to end the documentary on a positive note in that
stories of restoration.
Yeah. You can survive and you can thrive through this, and post-traumatic growth is what the phrase they like to use. Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
You can grow from it and be better.
And and guys and gals, the memories still gonna be there of the stuff you've gone through. When we talk about getting healed and set free from PTSD, you're still gonna have the thoughts. You're just not gonna have all the emotions and the physical stuff around those thoughts. So it's not like you're gonna forget the situation you were in, but it helps you relieve to where you can breathe, and it's more of just something that happened as opposed to something that traumatized you.
Right. That's where the name came from, residual.
I love that.
There's always going to be residual effects here. The difference is now you know how to deal with them. Now you know what you have to do to be able to get beyond that.
Yes.
And then that's the key.
Yes, and let's talk about that real quick before we close. I know I said that earlier, but we're going to go on a little bit further because this is important. Residual, meaning it repeats itself. It can start up and start back over, correct?
Yeah,
So
it's kind of tied into the triggers that there's you go through life and suddenly you hit a smell or a sound or something that's going to trigger you back to that trauma.
Yep.
It's how you deal with it going forward. Those residual effects. It's how you deal with it. That's what makes a difference. Once you get some help and you get some treatment, they still may come back, but now you have the tools in the toolkit to deal with them.
Yes, and I would say in my journey and from other first responders I've talked with, the residual effects of PTSD is very common. It's more common in first responders because we constantly get repeated to trauma, and the residual effects. When you start to get treatment, guys, I'm just going to be honest with you. When you start to get treatment, you first start to feel like you're coming out of the darkness, and it's great, and you're getting empowered, and you're getting some healing, and you can go along your healing journey, and everything can be going well, and you can be a week into it, you can be 6 months into it, you can be 5 years into it, and you feel like you finally got it figured out, you're doing well, and these residual effects can come back out of nowhere. And a lot of times when those residual effects come, especially when you've been kind of lifted up and you're starting to do better, when those residual effects come, those can sometimes be worse than the original depression,
right.
Because you're getting hope, you're restored, and now when you have these effects, it like cuts the legs out from underneath you, and you feel like you fall all the way back to the bottom. You feel like you have to start at the bottom of this dark well and try to get back out of it again. And that's not the case. It's what it feels like, but that is not the case. I know for me, that's what it felt like. And then when I would have those falls, I took it as my identity. I'm failure. I'm broken. I can't be fixed. Yeah, I got close, but it's not for me. And we can run away from that. And those falls from that residual effect can a lot of times lead to some of the destructive behavior like suicide and stuff like that. So being aware of the residual effect, knowing that it's normal, knowing that you have to be proactive about it, can absolutely save your life and help with your healing. And that's why I love that you named it residual, because it's not like a surgery. You go in, you get it fixed, and you're done. There's going to be times it comes back, and we have to be able to identify that and have the tools. So thank you for not just doing a video on PTSD and this is all it is. You actually talk about the cycle of it. To me, I always kind of figure it like a figure eight. I always felt like in my work, I'd start at the bottom when I was in this dark well, and I'd try to crawl myself up this 8. And as I about get to the top, my legs would get chopped out, and I'd have a trigger, and I'd fall all the way back down to the bottom. And that's what it felt like. It was just this figure 8 of ice. Like I could get up, and then I'd fall right back down. And once I understood that residual effects are normal, they're common. It's in pretty much everybody. You start to realize, okay, I'm not broke. Yeah, it may not have worked completely, but I am not where I used to be. I'm a lot further than I was. I am doing better. And this was it didn't kick my legs out from underneath me. It stubbed my toe. We get back on track, and we start working on our mental health again.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Doug, and thank you for sitting down with us for a couple episodes. I'm sure we'll have you back on in the future. Thank you for this project, and anything you want to say before we leave?
No.
All right.
Keep up the good work.
And go to residualfilm.com. Check out the stuff Doug is producing. And we will see you guys next time. Enjoy your families. Enjoy your time off. Enjoy God's creation. Get out and enjoy your hobbies. Enjoy your kids. Enjoy your family. And remember, this journey you don't have to walk alone. 1042 Project is here for you to connect you to the resources and to have an organization that can help support you, understand you, and walk alongside you. And we will be back shortly with another episode. And if you guys have any ideas for episodes that you want to hear, anything that you want us to dive into, please send me an email at dan at 10-42project.org. All right, guys. Thank you again, and love you all, and we'll see you next time.